Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I'm so pleased to welcome back Andrew Cartmel onto the podcast to talk about Underscore, which is the latest final detective novel.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Of course, this is what, 8, 9?
This is the 8th book. Yes. I had to think about that, though.
Yeah, there are so many now, which is delightful that I have to start thinking about it too.
Well, they all look really nice side by side because the cover designs by Martin Stiff are so striking, and the colors, because each book has a solid color to it, is really beautiful.
Yeah, they look really nice on my shelf. I don't have this one yet, but I believe that I have all of the rest.
So before we dive into our conversation, our quick little intro questions, what's something great that happened recently?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a friend who's an artist. That painting up there is by her, and she does all kinds of she does all the design for my plays. And I wanted her to do some book covers, but we haven't been able to make that happen yet. But she did this wonderful mural for my garden, and I loved it so much that I got her to do a second one. And just this week, I got the second, it's on this big piece of aluminum. It's like the size of a small door, and it's beautiful color printing. So I've got it now mounted in the garden. So this is all fantastic. So that's been a lovely thing. My garden's already starting to look nice with spring, but now it's got two artworks by my friend, the artist Sarah Jane Docker. So that's a nice thing that happened this week.
That sounds
That's
lovely.
fantastic.
I'll show you some photos afterwards. I don't know. It's not great for an audio podcast. So when we cease talking to the audience, I can show you some pics afterwards.
Yes, please. I would love to see pictures. My good thing is that it's an absolutely beautiful day out. So when we're done recording, I'm going to go do some weeding in my garden.
Lovely. I love a bit of gardening.
Yes. As does Nevada now.
Yes.
Yeah, well, my characters map my own trajectory, and I gradually got into gardening. Like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm an expert gardener. I'm a very lazy gardener, but I like to do small things that have a big effect, like planting something that's going to spread and look beautiful and give, color and fragrance every year. And since I'm interested in it, I made my characters interested in it, especially since their house very much reflects my house.
Good to know. I'm also going to be gardening today, but to make my good thing a little bit unique, I'm going to specifically call out the tulips that are blooming.
It's sort of the sign of spring, isn't it?
Yes. I was so sad. Our daffodils did not bloom this year. I think they might have gotten eaten. I don't know, but I was worried. So the tulips are coming up, and I'm happy about it.
Did they
Well,
grow?
yeah, critters like deer eat daffodils, don't they? I think. I'm pretending I know about these things.
Yeah. I bet they do. And I know there's wild rabbits around, so it could have been
Oh.
anybody.
I bet it was the rabbits.
Yeah. But the leaves came up and the stems came up and then just no flowers.
Oh, so the little bastards ate they ate the delicacies.
Yeah.
Yep, sounds like it.
But the tulips persevered. What is everyone drinking tonight?
Well, I'm always on drinking chocolate, and I had the last of some very nice Australian drinking chocolate. There's this firm in Australia called Mork, which always amuses me because I always think Mork and Mindy.
Mm-hmm.
And they do very nice stuff, and I used up the last of theirs tonight. So that was delicious. There's often has a little bit of salt in it, which is kind of interesting.
I was just in Melbourne and I saw Mork actually. So
Oh, cool. You're such a globetrotter. Yeah, it's a
yes.
great hot chocolate. Anywhere that you find that serves it, it's always worth ordering.
Yes, I didn't actually manage to have any of their hot chocolate, but I do remember seeing their stores around and it looked really nice.
Very nice. Very good.
I am bringing Sadie's here to California, so I am drinking a mimosa.
Oh, yeah. Sadie's is a fictional version of my favorite restaurant, which sort of doesn't exist anymore. So I feel it's all the more important to memorialize it.
Absolutely.
We have our secret fourth podcaster here.
There's a beautiful cat wandering into shot. That's what we like to see.
Yes.
Look at that gorgeous, gorgeous glossy.
Is this where you're going to sit? Okay.
I just spent 15 minutes giving my cat a tummy rub before. I was hoping that she'd grow tired before this podcast began, so I wouldn't have to cruelly break it off.
Reading about the cats in Underscore, the Vinyl Detectives cats are always so delightful, and it's nice, and all of the characters give them their attention as their due, which I appreciate.
It all adds to the picture and it adds to a little sense of reality. And I think regular readers like even though the cats never play a major part, I mean, there are cat mysteries, as you well know, but my cats are just peripheral pussycats. But I think that they are one of the ingredients that people enjoy coming back to when they get the books.
I would,
Absolutely.
yeah, I would agree with that because I love seeing them in the books.
I am drinking mint tea as a small
Ooh,
homage to the character Swithenbank, who we are introduced to as he's drinking some mint tea, herbal
yeah,
tea.
yeah, and it's so easy to make. Just get some fresh mint leaves, pour some hot water, and add sugar if you like sugar.
I do. I usually add honey, but
Ooh,
today
that'd
I
be
didn't.
nice.
I'm just
Yeah.
doing it straight. Yeah. And this is a book podcast other than Underscore, which we're about to discuss at length. Have we read anything good lately?
I've just been reading podcast books, which have been good, but don't really count for the purpose of this question.
Well, I've been reading a bunch of good stuff, but the one I suppose I should mention most is I was looking at my bookshelf the other day and I saw Rogue Mail by Geoffrey Household, which is a classic thriller. It's a fantastic book. And I thought I just had an old paperback of it. I thought I should buy a deluxe edition because I like to have, beautiful copies of my favorite books. So I ordered one and I was looking at this lovely hardcover, hardback copy of it. And I just thought I'll read the first page and I got completely sucked into it again. It's a fantastic, really engrossing, gripping thriller. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's about a guy. It's set in it's written in the 1930s. It's about a big game hunter who decides to shoot Hitler, but he's caught before he can shoot Hitler. He's never called Hitler. He's just called, rather sardonically, the great leader. But on page one of the book, he's caught, tortured, and then they throw his body over the cliff thinking he's going to be dead. This is we're only as far as page two at this point, but he survives. And then it's the story of how he not only escapes the immediate vicinity, but eventually escapes Germany. And it's just fantastic. It's incredibly gripping, brilliantly written. And I've started thinking, I've only ever read one other of his books. And I was beginning to think I might have to have a major Geoffrey Household revival. But it was a lesson in the art of thriller writing, I think.
Speaking of, this was a podcast book, so it doesn't totally count, but we read Murder on the Orient Express recently, and I did think of you because we do often talk about Agatha Christie and her great
I
influence
think
on.
she's a master of the form.
Mhm. But that was a recent read, and then I read Underscore. It's been a mystery kind of spring so far, I suppose.
It kind of has been, actually.
Crime fiction is the best fiction.
Yes.
But we are here to talk about Underscore.
Right.
And I think I say this every time we have you on, but I really want a Vinyl Detective cookbook because you include so much food in the book that our hero, the Vinyl Detective, cooks. And it always sounds so delicious, and I want to try the recipes. I think particularly the mac and cheese, which
the mac and cheese, it's so easy. I think the recipe is actually in the previous book, but I'm very happy to send it.
I'm pretty sure that you do include it on Noise Floor. I have a note in my cooking notes that says it's on like page 279 or something of Noise
I
Floor.
can always send you a copy of it. The thing is, I got some pushback from my editor this time because he said, "Oh, the mac and cheese was in the last book," and I said, "Yeah, but it's his signature dish, and the important thing in this one is that he's cooking it for an Italian. It's just pasta to an Italian. So it's like coals to Newcastle, if you know that expression. So it was just the perfect recipe, but I do need to come up with another great one. I'd heartily recommend to anybody who eats dairy, I'd recommend the mac and cheese is the finest version of that dish.
I like that though. It feels realistic. I mean, for someone who's cooking like for themselves and their partner, you're not, I mean, sometimes you try new recipes, but everyone has their go-to.
That's right.
The idea that he never repeats a recipe would be ridiculous.
No, that's really kind of you and very forgiving. I won't use it a third time.
I was wondering similarly if like I was tempted to go through and make a playlist out of the music mentioned in this book, but then I thought that might be insulting because I'm just going to listen to it on my phone and not the proper way with the good speakers and
No, I mean music, you should consume music however you can. And if you really like something, then you can explore it more deeply on a better system if you have such a thing. But I think you get the essence of it.
Because there is quite a bit of music talked about in all of the Vinyl Detective novels, of course. It's a central theme. But in
As a
this one
warning, a lot of
specifically,
that music is fictional. People will look it up and find that it doesn't exist, only contrived by the author.
I was going to ask, yeah, it feels like I bet some of it is fictional, and I'm sure some of the musicians you talk about are real though. And where is that line? How do you decide what you want to invent and what details you want to include from our world?
The fictional musicians really generally are only the ones who enter the story. The
Yeah.
other musicians who are mentioned are the real thing.
I assumed you didn't decide to make a historical musician a murderer or accuse one of
But
it.
if somebody's deceased, it's no longer libelous. So I think it's be well worth it steering clear of that.
But speaking of the murder that is central to this book, what inspired you to use Giallo films as the central theme?
Well, I love them and I love their music. So anybody who doesn't know Giallo are lurid Italian thrillers, sometimes with supernatural elements, sometimes not, sort of slasher movies largely. But where this came from is that there is a great Italian film composer called Piero Piccioni, and he was involved in the 50s. I touch on this in the book in a murder case. He was a suspect, eventually cleared. And that's where this all began. But that didn't mean it had to be about gialli, those movies. It could have been about any genre of film made in Italy. But I just thought, as with the book Attack and Decay, the violent detective novel, which deals with Scandi noir, like Scandi crime fiction, I wanted to have a book that had those kind of tropes in it. And similarly, in this case, I thought it might be useful to have some of the tropes of a giallo thriller. So that was sort of, and also, as I say, because I love them, and they do have great music.
Do you have a favorite one that you'd recommend people watch?
Ooh, the thing about them is they're often kind of not great movies. Like maybe some are great, but yes, yeah. There's a thriller by Dario Argento, and I believe it's Cat o' Nine Tails, which has a great Morricone score, and it's also got the most extraordinary ending. I will, if you, I will double check I think that's the title, and unless it's corrected, that is the correct title of it.
Presumably, the movie that we're dealing with for the bulk of this book, Murder in London, is a invented movie by you, I have to assume.
Yeah, that was the other thing that was in my mind. Had this idea because of Piero Piccioni about a composer who was involved in murder, and I thought I don't want to set it in Italy because I haven't been to Italy, and I could do research, on Google, but I always like to make it as real as I can. But I thought if I set it in London, especially London of the 60s, which is a period which fascinates me and which I've read a lot about and I've seen a lot of movies about, and to set it around the river, which is a fascinating part of London. So I knew from the sort of feeling that gave me that I could write about it because it inspired me.
And we get a really lovely description of the movie when our main characters watch it, and then some details are recurring throughout the book. How much of that was just drawing on your knowledge of the genre? How much of it, like, were there any specific inspirations? I'm very
Well,
curious.
part of it is purely kind of procedural and necessary in that I think, okay, it's a crime novel. There's got to be a certain amount of mayhem and murder and menace. So I knew that there had to be some set pieces, and I thought I could I could draw them from if I drew them from this film from the 1960s, it kind of would give an additional eerie resonance to everything, and I could have some fairly wild stuff. So I could have some quite outlandish action sequences. So that was one reason for doing that.
Fantastic.
So, one thing that really struck me about this book is I feel like in reading the other ones, I've always felt that the vinyl detective is maybe like in his 30s. And somehow this one made me feel like he was a bit younger than that. Do you have
Yeah.
an explicit age for him in your head, or is it very nebulous?
Well, it's late 20s, early 30s, basically. And it's interesting that you felt that he was a bit younger. That's nice. It's good. I was terrified you'd say he felt a lot older.
No, no, no.
But I wonder what it was that made you feel that. I'd just be fascinated to know if you could ever put your finger on it.
Yeah, I don't know because I'm interested in why I thought that too, and I haven't really come to a conclusion. Just that for all of the other books, I've always like pictured him in his mid-30s, and for this, I was like, oh, maybe he's actually in his 20s somewhere.
It's fascinating. And if you do manage to narrow down what gave that impression, I would be even more fascinated.
Yeah, I will keep you posted.
My theory is that a lot of the other characters in this book are older, and I think that difference,
Oh,
maybe,
okay, that's interesting.
my
Yeah,
working
Possible.
theory anyway. Because we get a lot of really fantastic, glamorous older women in this book that were incredible. I loved
That's
all of them.
well, thank you. No, I was just remembering some as you said that. And that's really nice of you to say that because I'm very fond of those characters.
Something that I noticed, or that sort of struck me in reading this book, is that we have our moment where the vinyl detective visits a flea market to look for vinyl, for
Yeah,
the record that he's been tasked with getting. And he mentions that he wasn't optimistic because those sales were sort of not as productive anymore. They were all pretty picked over. It was not the best place to find rare records.
exactly. Yeah.
And I was just wondering, I mean, that felt like just sort of a modernization of the book. I suspect that is how flea markets have changed as you've been writing the series, or
Yeah, very true. I mean, there's always been a problem with the dealers. Like dealers will get up really early. They'll go there first. They'll just hoover up everything, vacuum up all the good stuff. But that seems even more pronounced now. Plus, people are selling online, so they may not even take their best stuff. They'll look online, see if somebody's selling it at a crazy price, then assume they'll get the crazy price. This is me grousing about it. But yeah, so for all those reasons. So I think he had to reflect the reality of it. But on the other hand, he can still find amazing stuff, and I can still find amazing stuff. It's completely unpredictable.
Well, and I feel like the vinyl detective going to a flea market to look for records is such an iconic visual in these books. Like you can't have a vinyl detective book without that scene.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like not having Raymond Chandler having his detective get Philip Marlowe getting beaten up by the cops. It's almost required.
Exactly.
are there any other ways that these books have sort of modernized over the years of writing them?
The development of the characters, I suppose, because our little nucleus of people, Nevada, the hero, Agatha, and Tinkler, they're still in essentially the same configuration, but I mean, Tinkler just will now say things like, oh, this is Agatha, whom I'm hopelessly in love with. I have this doomed passion for her. And he's just completely open about it, and so is she. So whereas before it was sort of there, but not stated explicitly. So in that sense, which is slightly perhaps postmodern of them or meta of them, but that's kind of nice and kind of refreshing. And also, again, in character development, Tinkler's started having more girlfriends. That never works out, but that's still fine. And the characters, I guess, the subsidiary characters are getting more rounded. On the other hand, Stinky always remains pretty much the same, which is important because he has to just be that annoying nemesis for the hero.
Yeah, I don't
Absolutely.
necessarily want a lot of depth to Stinky because I love to hate him. He
Yeah.
he doesn't
Yeah.
need to be well-rounded.
No, one of my favorite writers is John D. MacDonald. He wrote 21 novels in a series about a character called Travis McGee, and he began referring to them as the books as a folk dance because essentially it's the same moves, although varied each time. So basically, Stinky comes on, does his thing, then he goes away again. And I always really look forward to those moments. You don't want too much, but you don't want too little, and you don't want it to be too different.
Two of the characters that are involved in this particular mystery are Desdemona and Cass, which the detective and Nevada discuss are named after Shakespeare characters. Is there anything to that other than their parents being Shakespeare fans?
At some point, I needed to name the characters, and I
Mhm.
think I'm not sure which. I suppose it was Desdemona I came up with. I thought that's a cool name. And when she had a brother, I immediately thought, oh, if her parents were pretentious enough to name her after a character in Othello, then they probably wouldn't have stopped there. And it was useful, and also it kind of unites those characters in an interesting way. It makes them distinctively different.
Before we move on to the spoilers, are you not going to ask me who should read this book?
Well, everyone.
I mean, yes. It's an easy answer.
Thanks.
I know we've talked about how all of these books are cozy detective mysteries, but
Right.
this one felt even cozier, and I don't know if that was just like where I was when I was reading
Cool.
them. or if this was just like the ultimate cozy.
I think it's because of old Italian grandmother feeding people pasta or wanting to
being
feed
fed
people,
pasta.
Yeah, be fed pasta.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Lily, do you think that is why?
It's possible. I think frankly, it might have just also been that like I needed cozy, and so I latched onto it.
Yeah.
But it was really nice when I started reading the book. I got to the first page and immediately met with cat antics, and I was like, oh, this is what I needed right now.
Right.
And then we get into the violence and the hijinks later on, but by then I was like fully engaged in this world.
Yeah, you kind of need that contrast of the cozy domesticity with the dangerous nightmare world outside.
Absolutely. And this was definitely where I was at, because when the cats are introduced, they feed Turk and Franny. Is that the other cat's name?
Fanny. Turk, yeah.
And Fanny doesn't show up for her food. And I was like, what happened to the cat?
I was very concerned, to be honest.
You didn't do anything. Yeah.
Like a tiny little cliffhanger. But I think I pay it off. She comes racing in by the end of the next chapter, I believe.
Yes. But I was primed. I was ready for something awful.
Yeah, I was too.
Well, Sarah, who should read this book other than people looking for a music and cinema themed cozy detective story?
I mean, I feel like that actually covers it quite well.
And cat nuts.
Yes.
Foodies, I think, would also really enjoy this series.
Yes. Again, I want that cookbook.
Yeah.
The cookbook will have to happen. Thank you.
Don't read it while you're hungry. That was a mistake I made.
Well, that's a lovely thing to hear. I believe that it worked, so thank you for that.
Yeah. This book will make you hungry, even if you are not reading it while you're hungry. This episode of Fiction Fans is brought to you by Fiction Fans.
That's us. We really appreciate our patrons, because otherwise we fund this podcast entirely ourselves.
Patrons can find weekly bonus content, monthly exclusive episodes, and they have free access to our biannual zine, Solsticia.
You can find all of that and more at patreon.com/fictionfanspod. Thank you for all of your support.
The remainder of this episode contains spoilers.
All right, in the spoilers now. Yay. About halfway through this book, the vinyl detective successfully purchases a copy of Murder in London, the record he's been looking for. It was described as like new condition, but of course it ends up being absolutely trashed. It seemed like there might have been some real-world experience behind that.
Oh, how fascinating that you detected that. Yeah, that actually happened. I bought a record that was described as something like near mint, and it actually had a hole in it, which like I can only assume was burnt with this. It literally had a hole, not where a record's supposed to have a hole. It was like beyond belief. And I got in touch with people and they're like, oh, sorry, I guess it's not near mint, but it's just so stupid. And that was combined with another thing, which came from real life experience. People who pack your record and then like cover it with Scotch tape, like they wrap and so like it's like trying to get into Tutankhamun's tomb, trying to get the record out. Incredibly frustrating. I thought if I combine those two things, make it incredibly difficult to get out, and then it turns out to be this complete junker. I love that. It was just a good little scene.
Absolutely.
It was a good scene. I don't have experience with records, but it reminded me of book buying, where you get something that, is according to the listing, says that it's in good condition or near fine or whatever. And then it turns out to be just poor. Very poor condition. And it's always devastating.
Yeah, and do these people even check their stock? Anyways, it's very frustrating, but it was useful there because we needed another bump in the story. We needed to feel that we were making progress, then we're frustrated. And also it meant I could bring back Lenny, who's a recurring character, who's another fun character.
He did not seem very contrite over it, although I suppose Nevada set him straight.
But that's the whole point, is like he refused to take any ownership of the terrible job he's done as a record seller, which only inflames the thing. And yeah, I think it's very true to life.
So speaking of Rafaela a little bit, I mean, we've touched on her just a smidge. We get a lot of her on the page interacting with the vinyl detective in very like kind of cozy domestic ways.
So Raffaella is the Italian grandmother.
Yes, she is the Italian grandmother who wants to eat pasta and who doesn't like the fact that they're drinking French wine. She brings them Italian wine.
Yeah, she's very,
Uh,
very passionately partisan about Italian everything.
she was delightful. And then it turns out that she's the murderer. I mean, she's
Yeah,
kind of
this is
the,
the spoilers. Yeah,
yeah.
that was. I hope that that was kind of cool. Quite an emotional journey for the reader.
Yes, it was a really fun reveal. I personally was not expecting it.
Oh,
But
good.
what was it like including her as like this secret villain in some of the cozier bits of the book?
Well, it was interesting because I plotted it out. I don't necessarily plot in huge detail, but I do need to know who the killer is or what the solution to the mystery is. So I thought the whole thing, the idea is that we think that it's the composer who murdered his lover, which would be the cops would I mean, that would be everybody's first thought. But then the second most likely suspect is his wife in a jealous rage. So she was a natural for it. So I knew she was going to be the killer, but when I wheeled her on stage, she mustn't obviously she couldn't be an obvious killer, so she had to be the opposite of that. And I thought, well, let's have lots of lovely fun with her and make her a really nice, likable character because I'm sure in her own mind. And in fact, that's sort of the heartbreaking thing because to her granddaughter, she's this wonderful woman, you know. So, and I think that is the way it is in real life. So it just made for a much richer character. And the sort of it's not just a case of misleading the reader and not letting them know that it's a killer. It's also kind of creating a rather tragic figure.
Absolutely. And especially with Chloe, her granddaughter, who is the one who hires the vinyl detective to find this record and then coincidentally also uncover a bunch of information about the mystery, or perhaps not so coincidentally for her.
Yeah, she deliberately wants to clear her grandfather's name and she thinks that she can achieve both. And she does.
Yes.
And it's really sad though, because if the final detective had been able to stick with his original plan of just finding the record, I mean, he doesn't necessarily want to find the murderer as well, but if he'd been able to just stick with his plan of finding the record, Rafaela would have been okay. Chloe would have been happy. Like it would have been a
Raphael
very,
would not be in prison.
yeah,
Chloe would not have been horribly disillusioned about her grandmother. But on the other hand, let's remember Raphael has started killing people and doing terrible things. So that's, he would have had to find the record before any of that happened.
it's true. She's not actually a good person. I just really liked her.
Well, the thing is, people aren't one thing or another necessarily. So she is in many ways a terrible person, but she's also in many ways not a terrible person. It's just I sort of promised myself I wouldn't bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. I'm so pleased when I came up with the ending for the book because she gets him to ring her in prison. Do you think what's this? There's going to be something like really heavy, like something about the murder, some revelation. She just wants to give him some recipe advice. And when I came up with that, I thought that's the perfect ending because like she's still the same person. She just wants, by the way, this is what you should do with the pink lemon juice. I was so happy with that because it was so in character and it was such a sardonic ending to the book. And I needed an ending because everything had happened, but I needed a little coda, just a little tweak, a little button at the end. And that was provided that. So I was very happy with that.
I absolutely loved that. And it does actually tie in to my next question, which is what was her suggestion for the lemon juice?
You know what? It's one of those terrible things where I didn't have the answer to that. You're the second person to ask me. I feel like such a fraud now. That's why I mean, it would have stopped there anyway, but that's an additional reason why I had to stop there because there wasn't but I'll come up with something. Don't worry.
I mean, salad dressing is the obvious answer.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. Like maybe
Mhm.
just with olive oil, perhaps,
Yeah.
as a dressing with some kind of salad. So thank you for that suggestion.
Mhm.
I mean, I am tempted to try marinating some onions in lemon juice and then figure out what to do with the lemon juice now because
Yeah,
I have a ton of lemons.
make sure that it's it's red onion, and then you get this lovely pink juice.
Mhm. So Rafaela is, obviously a hugely involved character in the course of this novel, but we also meet Juno, who is sort of the other suspect. And she also has an absolutely tragic sort of character arc over the course of this
Yeah.
book, although in a very different way.
Yeah, I was so pleased with Juno, and I really liked her name when I came up. Well, I've often said that when you come up with a good name for a character, that's you're halfway there. And she was just so much fun to write. She was so interesting, such a cool character.
I was glad that she was not harmed when her houseboat burned.
Yeah, and even her dog was safe too because she was walking the dog, I believe, when it happened. Yeah, so she's going to be okay. She's a lovely character with a lovely dog, and she lost a bunch of stuff, but it was just stuff, right? It wasn't, no living things were hurt in that firebomb attack on her boat. The poor thing.
And the vinyl detective helps her replace her vinyl collection, so
That's true. Yeah, no, one kind of falls in love with these characters. You just create them
Mhm.
for story reasons, but if they're any good, they come to life, and then they're an enormous boon to the story.
Is it
Well,
hard to put them through bad things if
Yeah.
when you
Yeah,
like them so
I
much?
found, sorry to interrupt, but that you were so right about that I had to jump in. It's such a good question because it's so true. Since I started writing these books, I find it harder and harder to kill people off. So you'll often find that somebody will just end up badly wounded or in a coma or something like that because I just feel it's so unfair to cut short their existence. And I mean, I know that sounds a bit nutty because they don't really exist. If you want a purely pragmatic reason for it, once you've killed off a character, you can't use them again. So, I mean, that's a much more cut and dried reason for it. But yeah, because you sort of care about them, you think, you're giving them this fictional life. It should at least be a pleasant fictional life. And sometimes when I have to do something terrible, and this is going to make me sound a little bit nutty, but I think you have to be a little bit nutty to write stuff. In an earlier book called Attack and Decay, because it's that kind of Scandi noir, which is grisly stuff, what I call the Danish disembowelment school of crime fiction, the victim had to be horribly mutilated and, his body's cut to pieces. And I thought, oh, how can I bear to do this to the poor guy? And I thought, you know what? The way to think about it is he's just an actor. They were just shooting a movie, and after the scene's over, he's going to get up again, and they'll wash the fake blood off him. It's just special effects. And I know it sounds nonsensical and a bit nutty that I had to do that mental gymnastic, but you see, the point is otherwise. I'm the sort of person who's writing about horrible things happening to people, and I think that's not very nice.
yeah.
I'd hate to be the sort of person who writes about that gloatingly and enjoys writing about it. I think it speaks well to me that I feel terrible about writing about that. I needed some kind of rationale to get me around it. But that's a long answer to a very perceptive question. So thank you for that, Sarah.
And I think part of that is what makes these books so charming and enjoyable because even when we are reading about murder mysteries, I think that comes through on the page that it's not reveling in the violence or the misery.
It's not casual. And the thing is,
Mhm.
I hope what comes across is that when things like that happen, they have cataclysmic reverberations for the people involved. So it's not. I hate it in fiction when I read about like a murder or something and it's just casual. One thing that used to drive me nuts on television in like a dumb crime shows, you'd have a dead body lying in a room. And these people would be standing around talking like casually. There's no way that if there's a body in the room, people they would have this atavistic primal kind of revulsion. Like you wouldn't want to be in a room with a corpse. It's just the complete lack of sense of reality about the enormity of these things. So I do try and remain aware of that.
And the characters deal with that a little bit in this book with Tinkler's bumper sticker.
Thank you. Yes, he's so inappropriate, but it was great because he does that's how he processes it, that which is
Mhm.
which I think is quite healthy. And people like cops and emergency service workers who are exposed to this kind of trauma, they do find that gallows humor is a good way of dealing with it.
And it does make sense that Tinkler needs to reclaim his vehicle for himself.
Because otherwise, how could he even bear to drive it? So that, but it was very much in keeping. He's done things like that in the past. Like he turned a child's coffin into a drinks cabinet. He's had T-shirts like "I went to Canterbury and all I got was this lousy murder attempt." So he does have a history of doing that. But I liked that when I thought of that because it was a callback to an earlier book, but also the thing for me is always how do I get enough menace into a book early enough? And I could sort of cheat a little bit by referring to terrible things that had happened in a previous book, but it reminds us that we're in a crime novel and that there is a sense of menace throughout, which you want to get that in there for the reader. Otherwise, you're two-thirds of the way through the book and you've had lots of fun, but there hasn't been anything dramatic or threatening that has happened yet.
Mhm.
Slightly unrelated, but if you ever decided to sell merchandise for the series, I think that t-shirt and that bumper sticker would be
Oh,
excellent.
the
I would buy
bumper
them.
sticker is a great idea. And a friend actually got a t-shirt of that printed for me. It's upstairs. So yeah,
Amazing.
so you're thinking along the same lines. Yeah, it's great. And I just hasten to add for anybody who hasn't read the book, the child's coffin never actually had a child in it. They dig it up and discover that it's actually full of papers, full of notebooks.
Yes, and that's something that the characters point out as well during that conversation.
Thank heavens. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I have to draw the line somewhere.
Mhm. Speaking of characters that get to make a reappearance in this book, we got the return of Princess Satan.
I was so pleased. I love her so much. Like she was in the last book. I've been desperate to bring her back because she's so much fun.
Mhm. And she really makes an entrance for the time that she spends on the page with us.
But it's a bit like Stinky that she's not there long, but she makes a big impression.
She absolutely does. And she kind of, so in the last book, she's definitely a villain. I mean, she drugs the vinyl detective. She's part of
Yeah.
this
Ring.
heist. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here she's kind of almost a good guy.
Yeah, she was so appealing that I wanted to bring her back. I didn't want to bring her back as a threat. I wanted to bring her back as almost as a quasi kind of a friend, And
Mhm.
I'm so glad you mentioned that scene because I was thinking about it the other day because I even researched. She's got a shirt like with cowboys on it or something. Like I always find this stuff online, and she's so much fun. Like she's got such a sense of style. She really does have flair, that girl.
I still want to see her and Cordelia, the paperback sleuth, team up.
That is definitely something I've thought about because they are similar in their complete lack of a moral compass. So that they are, and I think Cordelia would be like, "Wow, this is what I want to be when I grow up."
Yeah. Princess Satan not only shows up to warn the vinyl detective about some communications she's been seeing online, she also makes a subtler appearance farther on in the book as part of Stinky's comeuppance for
That's
existing
right.
that he deserves.
That's right. I was so pleased. We always need Stinky to be taught a lesson, and she was the perfect method to achieve that.
Yes. And yet, for some reason, he never really learns.
If he learned,
Yeah.
he needs to be a very simple creature morally for
Mhm.
for him to be a running gag in our books. So we don't want him to become any nobler than he is.
No, he absolutely earns his comeuppance in this book because when he first shows up to talk to the vinyl detective, he's just giving him the most horrible love life advice for
I
how to
know.
trick these women into a three-way. Um,
But that's the way his mind works. But
yeah,
yeah.
I think that was noteworthy. Well, it was noteworthy because we love to hate Stinky, but also it was such a stark difference with the way the other characters have been responding to the two women who are staying with the vinyl detective and Nevada. We have Chloe and Desdemona, who had been in a relationship, seems to have had an acrimonious breakup, and are maybe reigniting things, much to the dismay of their families. And while Tinkler makes some references, some, jokey remarks,
Yeah.
their relationship is really quite sweet and handled very thoughtfully on the page.
I'm so pleased you said that. I really, really hope that was the case. And to have your validation of that means a hell of a lot to me. Thank you, Lily. It really does.
Yeah, and it really comes out when then you get Stinky sort of swooping in and just objectifying them.
Get the contrast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really makes it stand out because the two of them also, Chloe and Desdemona, are so, I don't want to say flamboyant, but they're characters. They're personalities.
They're big, colorful characters. Yeah, right.
Yes. And so when the hints started dropping that they had a past and would possibly be getting together, part of me wondered if it was going to go a little soap opera-y just because of the way that their two characters were independently. But then having it be very tender and personal was such a nice twist on its own.
I'm so pleased. I really, it's, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm so happy that it worked. And I thank you so much for saying that. It's really rewarding when something like that comes off.
Mhm.
And they get married at the end.
I was
That
so
was
Yeah.
so
pleased with that.
sweet. I was so pleased.
Yeah, I like those little coders that wrap lots of things up, and it just seemed the right destination for that story.
Well, it's interesting too, especially because we've had the Vinyl Detective and Nevada in a, you know, very established relationship since book one when they get together, having sort of the new introductions of different romances between new characters to explore that sort of
Yeah,
initial.
you can do that sort of soap opera thing. You can't do it with your main characters, but you can do it with
Mhm.
subsidiary characters. And when I say soap opera, I'm just using it as a shorthand for, telling love stories.
Mhm. You've explored a lot of different themes in because each Vinyl Detective novel has its own like core concept, right? This one is the Giallo movies. We've talked a lot about the Scandinavian noir. Is there one that you would like to revisit?
Yeah, I sort of kind of touched on, well, several really. Flipback was sort of about folk music, but there's much more to be had from folk because it's such a rich field. So folk music I like to revisit. And also Noise Floor, although it dealt with, electronic dance music, again, that's hardly scratched the surface of that. So I've come up with ideas for, both for folk music and also for electronic music for further explorations, making them as different as possible, of course. But those are the first two that I've thought about re-exploring.
Is this a series that you intend to write just for as long as you have ideas for, or do you have a set kind of like
I'd
ending
like
in
to
mind for the series?
keep going as long as there's interest from me and from readers. I don't see any point ending something before you absolutely have to. As long as they're fun, continue to be fun. And sometimes think, oh my gosh, how many can I come up with? I think, it's one book a year. You know, all I have to have is one idea a year. It's really not that difficult. And I mentioned John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels. There's 21 of those, but one of my all-time favorites is Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe, and I think there were 73 Nero Wolfe novels, and I don't think there was a dud in them. I don't know because I haven't read them all, but I suspect they were at least 70 of them were really good. So, you can sustain these. You have to keep up the quality though, because I have read others who I never name because I think it's very bad to knock another writer. But I was reading another writer's books about a recurring character, and I'd read half a dozen, and they were great. Then I read one that was a dud. It's like biting into a rotten apple. And then you think, oh well, maybe it was just a one-off. Then I read another one that was a dud, and then that was it. I never read another one by that author. And so what I'm saying is I cannot afford to put a rotten apple on the market. I've got to make sure that they're always good. And I'm sure nobody deliberately does that, but I think especially if you become successful, you can become lazy and your quality control can drop, especially if you're writing in a hurry and people want the book, they want it now, they don't care if it's good. And when I say people, not just the readers, but your editors too. So it's something you have to be on guard against. You have to maintain the quality because it's such a betrayal, especially if somebody loves a series and then you don't deliver. It's just, yeah, it mustn't happen.
It's almost worse than a series that never gets finished for it to be finished poorly.
Well, yeah, and actually, I keep going back to Travis McGee, but he wrapped that up pretty well. He just
Mhm.
thought of a way of coming. And another series that I loved is Peter O'Donnell's Modesty Blaze, and he finished that in kind of a heart-rending way. But again, it was a proper ending. But I don't think we should. I certainly have no plans to end the Vinyl Detective anytime soon. Whether my publisher wants to keep on publishing them, but even that's these days. If a publisher wanted to drop the series, I could just publish it myself. It's a different world now. So as long as there's a readership for it, then it can be, as long as I can keep writing them well, I think it should keep going.
Well, I'm certainly delighted that we'll continue to get vinyl detective stories.
Thank you. I mean, it's great. And Paperback Sleuth. So my agent has just asked me for two pitches in each series. So I've come up with two more ideas for both series. And also, this is a real scoop. I've written something entirely new crime novel. I've written the entire novel. I've written outlines for two more. I've written a pitch document. My agent's got all those. We'll see what happens with it. And if it sells, as I hope it will, I can tell you all about it. So
Yes.
and if that happens, there'll be three of these series going. So let's see what happens.
definitely want to hear all about that. So fingers crossed it sells. But just how, so you have the Vinyl Detective series, you have the Paperback Sleuth series. Currently, you're having a release in each, one per year. So that's two books
Yeah.
per year. How do you find the time for all of this writing?
Well, yeah, one of my favorite novelists, another one, was called John Dixon Carr, and he also wrote under a pseudonym, Carter Dixon. And he, in his prime, he was putting out 4 books a year. Nero Wolfe, I mentioned that he wrote 70 books, and that was over about 40 years. So that must have been like 2 books a year, something like that. Rex Stout used to write his Nero Wolfe novels in 38 days, like that. He used to allot 38 days. And these were really good books. Like, I mean, beautifully written, superbly plotted with great characters and all different as far as I can tell. So what we're saying is that 3 books a year is by no means impossible. I worked out that I could do 3 books a year and still have the other half of the year to write stage plays. So, it's just a matter of when I'm going in a book, I try to get 2,000 words a day done. I don't always manage it, but at 2,000 words a day, your book is finished in less than 2 months, even with the days off and days when you undershoot that. So it's a matter of organization and energy. And also, as I say, having those examples of guys who wrote a lot of books, and they were really good books. And I'm hoping that I will be in a position to have 3 series going, and my intention would be to have a book in every series every year.
Do you think that your time in television, working in television, has helped with that ability to write quickly? Or is it just that you have these examples so you know it can be done, so you know you can do it?
I have written quickly in the past, but the trick is to write really quickly and really well. And I suppose you're right. It's the fact that I've got these examples, because I have thought sometimes, a few years ago, I probably, if you told me write 3 books a year, I would have just put my head in my hands and been in despair. But no, I realized that I could consistently maintain. You see, Graham Greene used to write 500 words a day every day, and that's 2 books a year, right? So that's 2 books a year right there. So if you can write at 2,000 words, which isn't a huge advance on that, not only do you get more than 2 books a year, you can have lots of time off to do other things. You just have to sustain it. So you sort of have a period of the year when I write novels, and a period of the year when I don't. And I mean, let's wait and see if all 3 series remain in print and are commissioned every year. Then we'll see how my master plan pans out. But it's certainly doable. And it's certainly quite attractive because, as I say, it would leave the other half a year for writing plays and doing other things. But I love writing plays and putting on plays. And it's not like writing is work. It is quite hard work, but it's something I love doing so much. It's not like I'm waiting for the day when I can retire from writing. Writing is what I do. I suppose it's easier to imagine with a painter or a musician. A composer, couldn't imagine them stopping doing it, especially a painter. Why would they stop painting? It would be a terrible thing to do. So yeah, let's hope that we get all 3 series going. We'll see how my theory of the 3 books a year works out, but it's certainly feasible.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that you loosely plot out these novels before you write them. Were there any moments in this book that surprised you?
As I mentioned, I didn't have the very ending, like exactly exactly the way the book was going to come to a conclusion. So when that came to me, I was just so pleased. I was very, very happy about that. What else surprised me? I suppose Juno's character just became much richer and deeper and more interesting than I'd expected when I was just plotting it out. The relationship between the 2 women it worked really well because they're both sort of saying, "Oh, it's like when you're at school and somebody, that people keep asking about each other, and you know that something's going on between them." I just that just sort of it came together and it worked. When I was starting the book, I was just thinking, okay, so I got this collection of characters. I got these two women and a man. I thought the first thing you need is relationships between people. So I thought, okay, so the man and the woman can be brother and sister. Great, because I can instantly begin to write siblings because I know that there's going to be things going on between them. And I did consider that the woman could be involved with the man, but I thought it's much more interesting if she's involved with the other woman. And it was just then of course the brother will have an opinion about that. So I suppose the surprises more came in exactly the fashion that things developed rather than any big surprises in plot terms. I'm just rapidly running through the plot in my mind, trying to think if there was any major changes. But some things happened much more succinctly than I expected. So, you don't need a lot of mysterious figure shooting a gun at somebody for it to be effective.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions. Sarah, was there anything else?
I don't think that we had any more questions about the book, but Andrew, as always, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast to talk about the series with us. We really appreciate it. We really enjoy the series and delighted to hear that there are more in the pipeline.
It's great to have you guys out there. It makes it all worthwhile. It really does. And you say such perceptive things, both of you, about the books that it really makes it worthwhile.
Well, thank you. You've talked a little bit about some of the things you're working on with this project that you're shopping around and that hopefully sells so that we can read it. But can you tell us a little bit about any current projects? I know there's a paperback sleuth book coming out soon.
There's a new paperback sleuth called Like a Bullet, which is out, I believe, in June. Very happy with that. There's one scene in particular, and I'm waiting until we have to sit down and have a chat to see if you guys mention that scene, because I was really proud of it. So we'll wait to see if that happens. Also, some hot new news. The Vinyl Detective is just sold to Spain. There's going to be a Spanish edition. There was previously a German edition, a Czech language edition. There's now also going to be a Spanish edition of at least the first two books. So that's quite exciting for me.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So what other news is there? I'm hoping to have a play on this year, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pull that off. But we're in negotiations with a theatre to see if they're interested. I've reached that point where I've written the books this year. So I'm in the phase when I want to start writing plays. So the next week or two, I'm going to start writing plays. And I'm not entirely sure I'm going to write, which is really exciting, in a way. It's a little bit scary in a way, but it's also really exhilarating and exciting to have this expanse of snow in front of me with no footprints in it. So,
well, where can you be found on the internet so that our listeners can hear about, these plays that you're writing and all of your releases and your exciting information and news?
I am on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter will always remain Twitter to me as Andrew Cartmel, and it's me because there's a picture of me with my cat Molly. And I'm also on Instagram, identified with the same photograph, but I am called the Vinyl Detective London because the name Andrew Cartmel was taken on Instagram and Vinyl Detective was taken too. So I had to be Vinyl Detective London. So it's a bit of a strange moniker, but that's where you will find me. Also, if you do a bit of digging, you can find my weekly radio show, which is called Vinyl Detective Radio, which is just me playing music that I like. And that's on Medway Pride Radio and Reclaimed Radio are the two platforms who support it so far. So if you just Google those things, you can find it online. And I think that's pretty much me in terms of my social media reach.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and looking forward to Like a Bullet.
Well, thank you guys. It's always a pleasure. And I hope everything is great for you guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Blue Sky and Instagram at fictionfanspod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com or leave a comment on YouTube.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find exclusive episodes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.